This lecture may be injurious to your sentiments. It may incur rational sense in you. Watch at your own discretion. Your sentiments are not my liability. Back in school, I often heard some science teachers saying that literature doesn't give us any facts or knowledge, and so literature is inferior to science as a subject to be studied. Yes, literature is not a subject you study to learn, gather, or memorize facts. Then what does it do? And why and how is it important for humanity? Prominent non-fiction writer of the Romantic Age, Thomas De Quincey, elaborates on this topic in his essay Literature of Knowledge and Literature of Power. The objective of this lecture is to explain to you what he wrote in his essay. As usual, we are not here to summarize but to analyze the text. I ask for your patience and attention throughout the lecture, and I assure you that you will understand the text thoroughly by the end of this lecture. The essay begins with De Quincey explaining what is understood as literature and what literature is. He says that the thoughtless population understands anything that is printed in the form of a book as literature. De Quincey points out that literature must relate to a general and common interest of man. It cannot be something of personal, professional, or local interest. So, according to this distinction, every book cannot be regarded as literature. Without this distinction, an almanac, a timetable, or a dictionary of medical terms could be categorized as literature, but we all know that would be ridiculous. So, every book is not a piece of literature. Also, not all literature is represented by books. For example, De Quincey mentions pulpit literature as well as drama. Sermons have the qualities of literature. They influence the popular mind to warn, to uphold, to renew, but they are not disseminated in the form of books, but are told from the pulpit to the pious people on Sundays. Similarly, be it the Athenian theatre of the classical age or the English theatre of the age of Shakespeare, drama operated as a literature on the public mind, but it did not act so in the form of books, but in the form of art performed on stage. De Quincey points out that such dramas could never be as effective as they have been in the public mind if they were to reach the people in the form of books. So, as books don't always contain literature, literature doesn't necessarily mean only books either. So he says, books, therefore, do not suggest an idea coextensive and interchangeable with the idea of literature, since much literature, scenic, forensic, or didactic, as from lecturers and public orators, may never come into books, and much that come into books may connect itself with no literary interest. Next, De Quincey goes on to say that there are two different kinds of literature based on two distinct functions they fulfill. He names these two types of literature as the literature of knowledge and the literature of power. It is not as if these two types cannot blend, but generally they are quite opposite in their operation. In brief, the function fulfilled by the literature of knowledge is to teach, and of the literature of power is to move. According to De Quincey, the literature of knowledge gives us new information and understanding regarding things, whereas the literature of power doesn't give us any new information or understanding, but elevates the humane qualities that are already attained by us. To make the distinction clear, he has used many comparisons. First, he compares the literature of knowledge with the rudder, while the literature of power is like the oars or the sail. It means that knowledge gives us the direction in which we should move, but it is the oars or the sail that ultimately help us move towards that direction. Why is this so? To explain that, he compares the literature of knowledge with a dry light that enables one to see and discover something new in distance, whereas the literature of power is like a humid light after a rain in which one's field of vision is not much, but one can see the rainbow. The play of colors that lifts one's mood. The colors of a rainbow are always present in sunlight, but it is that humid light that enables us to enjoy those colors. Here, dry light gives you a clear vision to enable you to explore something new in the distance. The humid light does not give you the scope to explore the unknown, but it gives you a view of what is already there to motivate you, elevate your soul, and evoke your emotions in a certain direction. Let me give you a simple example. If you teach school children that it was Isaac Newton who discovered gravity and then explain what gravity is, the school children will get some new information, some truth that was unknown to them, and they will try to memorize the facts. On the other hand, if you tell them the story of Newton and the apple, regardless of whether that is a myth or a true story, it will connect to the emotions of those students, and they will not only remember the information but also learn something of a greater value, which is to be curious about anything and everything that happens around them. So, the impact and effectiveness of the story are more than mere facts. That is how the literature of power functions. It gives nothing new in terms of truth and knowledge, but it connects us emotionally to what truth and knowledge are already there. De Quincey says that the greatest of truths that occupy the highest place in human interest are not novel, meaning the truths that humanity needs the most are not something new to be discovered, but the simplest of truths that have been known to us since the dawn of civilization. So, what is needed is not the planting of new truths, but the development of those simple truths in the human mind. And that is, according to him, the objective of the literature of power. We must note that by power, he means deep sympathy with truth. Thomas De Quincey calls the literature of power the higher literature. He compares the significance of Milton's Paradise Lost with the significance of a cookery book. He says, what do you learn from Milton's Paradise Lost? Nothing at all. What do you learn from a cookery book? Something new, something that you did not know before, in every paragraph. But would you therefore put the wretched cookery book on a higher level of estimation than the divine poem? He explains that we do not owe Milton any new knowledge, but power. Whereas the literature of knowledge expands our vision on the same earthly level, the literature of power doesn't provide us with the pleasure of exploration, but of elevation on the same land on which we already stand. Knowledge carries you further on the same plane, but power gives you flight. It takes you above the earthly level. Next, the essayist says that unless human sensibilities are not ventilated and continually called on into exercise, it would gradually droop and dwindle like any muscular ability falling into disuse. So what the literature of power does, according to him, is to work on the moral capacities of man. He explains why poetic justice is significant, although it is different from how the real world works. The role of poetic justice is to develop in man the sense of what should be, what is ideal, and what is the virtuous path. The author says, were it not for the literature of power, these ideals would often remain amongst us as mere arid notional forms. Whereas by the creative forces of man put forth in literature, they gain a vernal life of restoration and germinate into vital activities. So, the ideals are already there in the understanding mind of man. But what the literature of power does is to inspire man to follow those ideals in their activities. Here, De Quincey compares the importance of the two kinds of literature. According to him, the literature of power is more important than the literature of knowledge. To substantiate his claim, he argues that the literature of knowledge is important as long as it gives us some new truth. For example, he says Newton's Principia Mathematica is significant when it is the newest found truth. And as soon as someone else finds a newer truth based on the work of Newton, nobody cares about the Principia Mathematica anymore. It becomes old information considered as common knowledge, nothing to be astonished about, and it is thus neglected. On the other hand, literature of power, once produced, remains significant forever. It never loses its value. It is never replaced by a newer truth. According to De Quincey's belief, Newton's name and work are destined to be buried under the newer and newer inventions, discoveries and theories as the study of knowledge continues its course. Whereas the names and works of Aeschylus, Shakespeare, Milton or Michelangelo will remain irreplaceable. To add to his argument, he uses another analogy. A good steam engine is properly superseded by a better, but one lovely pastoral valley is not superseded by another. Here, the literature of knowledge is compared to the steam engine and the literature of power is compared to the pastoral valley. A specimen of the literature of power cannot be superseded because such specimens are unique. They cannot be compared with one another and be decided as better or worse. They are human works of immortal beauty, and yet every one of them is different from the others. You cannot replace Milton with Shelley or Shakespeare with Shaw, can you? In the last part of the essay, Thomas De Quincey puts stress on the point that the literature of power is greater than the literature of knowledge. He says, all the literature of knowledge builds only ground nests that are swept away by floods or confounded by plough. But the literature of power builds nests in the aerial altitudes of temples sacred from violation or of forests inaccessible to fraud. This is a great prerogative of power literature, and it is a greater which lies in the mode of its influence. The knowledge literature, like the fashion of this world, passeth away. So these are the central ideas found in the essay, and now comes our evaluation of this essay. This style is the first thing we focus on. Thomas De Quincey explains his ideas with a lot of examples and analogies which make the essay quite comprehensible. In contrast, his writing is full of long roundabout sentences with a few allusions and Latin as well as Greek phrases. These aspects of the essay show his erudition, but at the same time complicate the communication between the reader and the author. Not every line of his essay is understandable without the help of annotations. Yet, the topic of his choice didn't require such complexity.
Hello, this is Rishikesh, and you are welcome to my channel, Rishikesh Lectures. Education is quintessential for any civilization to sustain its civil sense. Observing the calamitous condition of the education system and realizing the urgency to spread education as far as one can, I have started to lecture on YouTube. As far as authenticity is concerned, I have a first-class master's degree in English literature and I am UGC NET qualified. My lectures are long and detailed as a real classroom lecture should be. Also, most of my lectures are available on YouTube Music as podcasts. And if you like the way I try to educate, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to the channel so that the algorithm gets it to more and more students of literature. Lastly, we come to the subject matter of the essay. De Quincey has pointed out the common man's misunderstanding regarding the definition of literature and its function. He has pointed out that literature and books are not the same thing. Sometimes literature is found in the form of a book, sometimes not. He has pointed out two different kinds of literature and two different functions they fulfill. He has termed what we generally call the study of science and other subjects that focus on facts, the literature of knowledge. And he has termed what we simply call literature, the literature of power. He has pointed out the clear distinction between these two and has explained how they work. Up to this point, I accept his ideas, but then, in conclusion, he vehemently says that the literature of power is greater than the literature of knowledge. Not only that, he quite aggressively belittles the significance of knowledge and goes on to say that it is like fashion that passeth away, as if we could do well without knowledge but not without power. Here I disagree, because he did not point out that there are good and bad literature within the literature of power. Good literature inspires people to follow values and ideals that are good for humanity as a whole, whereas bad literature does the opposite. So, according to his ideas, we have to categorize literature into either of the two kinds, literature of knowledge and literature of power. In support of my disagreement with his claim that the literature of power is always greater in significance than the literature of knowledge, I am taking the analogy given by him in the beginning part of the essay, where he says that knowledge is the rudder, whereas power is the sail or oar. If we take his definition of the literature of power and what it does, we still cannot deny the necessity of knowledge, because, as he said, though power is what moves us, it is knowledge that decides the direction of that movement. Without a direction guided by authentic knowledge, however boring and old it might be, we might move towards a direction that is not right for humanity. To substantiate my argument, I shall give two examples. Firstly, Hitler's Mein Kampf is an autobiography that moved a lot of people, but towards the wrong direction. Is that a literature of power we would like to have that is not guided by true knowledge but can connect to the emotions of a large number of people and move them towards becoming evil in the name of elevating their status? De Quincey has mentioned that a vast amount of literature exists out of books, and as an example he mentioned pulpit literature. So my second example would be such speeches that, according to De Quincey, act so extensively on the popular mind to warn, to uphold, to renew, to comfort, to alarm. We have seen many times in history as well as in the present, if we are not blinded by faith, how literature of power in the form of religious and political speeches and writings has moved people towards destruction or kept them silently and thoughtlessly submissive under oppressive regimes. My point is that literature of power has great abilities to influence humanity, but we must never ignore the literature of knowledge, as De Quincey has suggested. De Quincey was a supporter of imperialism, colonialism, and anti-abolitionism. So in today's political terms, his alignment was to the far right. And perhaps that's why moving mattered to him more than the direction. Power mattered to him more than knowledge. As a brown man born in a once colonized part of the world, my perspective is different. In the era of information and technology, we are seeing how misinformation, which is the opposite of true knowledge, can influence people, reinforcing pseudoscience and our sentiments towards mythology through literature is moving us back towards superstitions. Literature is being produced in large amounts to influence people in the opposite direction of truth. And these literatures always connect to the popular mind as they use popular sentiments such as nationalism, spiritualism, or cultural tradition. So, connecting with the general sentiment of a population cannot be the ultimate scale to measure the importance of literature. Good literature must be guided by knowledge and truth. Otherwise, it may have the power to move, but not in the right direction. The literature of power must never be given the freedom to ignore the literature of knowledge. What happens when you give such freedom to the literature of power? Let me give you an example. In the so-called first world nation of the United States of America, there are states even today where Darwin is not taught because it denies the biblical myth of creation. Here the Bible is a specimen of the literature of power, and Darwin's Origin of Species is a specimen of literature of knowledge. Thus, when we do not bridle the immense ability that the literature of power has and rein it with knowledge, it becomes like riding a cheetah towards our own fall. The two literatures, as De Quincey has pointed out, have their own limitations. The literature of knowledge gives us rational and factual truth, and the literature of power gives us emotional force. The first can guide us, but cannot control us on its own. The second can influence us immensely, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the influence is always positive, constructive, and towards a better tomorrow. We must not neglect either of these. For the betterment of humanity, both are equally needed, like the pair of pedals on a bicycle. That is what I think about the topic, and this is how I would criticize the essay. Your thoughts and your evaluation of the essay may be different. But what is certain to be advised, to think, to question, to debate, never follow any idea without thinking about it, questioning it, or understanding it thoroughly. Thank you for listening. It inspires me when you hit the like button or share or subscribe to the channel.